Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. It's been a while since we painted some Eldar for the channel, and we've had a few requests for more. Instead of contrast paints, this time I'll be using an airbrush for a couple of the base coats. So let's get started. We also have some recipe cards available, and you can download them and print them out. Details about how to get them will be down in the description below. I'll be painting some of the parts separately, and after assembling the model, I attached the pieces to corks for easier handling. I want to go with really bright orange and yellow on this model, and it's important to have a bright white undercoat. My favorite way of priming white is beginning with a gray primer from a spray can, followed by white paint from my airbrush. I'm using regular white acrylic paint from Vallejo Game Color, diluted with water. I like to make several passes over the model until I get a bright finish. I base coated the helmet with gold yellow from Vallejo Game Color. I sprayed a few thin layers for a solid, even finish. If you don't have an airbrush, I have a bright yellow contrast-only recipe in my Striking Scorpions video, and you can check it out here. Next, I highlighted the helmet with moon yellow. Rather than spray all over, I focused the airbrush near the front of the helmet and from the top, almost like a zenithal style spray. Moving on to the orange next, I base coated the model with an equal parts mix of Troll Slayer Orange and Fire Dragon. I transferred my paints to dropper bottles, and it makes measuring mixes a lot easier. Troll Slayer Orange is a little too dark and too transparent. Fire Dragon is more opaque, but it's too light. An equal mix of the two is just right for me. If you don't have an airbrush and want a contrast-only recipe for a bright orange, check out my Leagues of Votann Kill Team video here. Once the orange base coat was solid and even, I highlighted the model with Fire Dragon. Just like with the helmet, I also sprayed this highlight in a zenithal style, focusing more of the paint near the top of the model. Some painters like to temporarily assemble the model when spraying zenithal effects, so the lighting is consistent. I would do that if the lighting effect was a lot stronger, but this effect is so subtle that I don't think assembling is necessary. Let's set aside the airbrush now and move on to regular brushes. Next, I shaded the helmet with Casandora yellow. I like using the biggest brush possible because it speeds up the painting process and usually makes the paint go on smoother. This is an older No. 2 brush with a blunt tip. I'm trying to direct the paint away from the front of the helmet, and I'd like the front to be smooth and bright, and have just a thin layer of wash to tint the surface, and I'm allowing more of the paint to pool in the recesses and around the details. Next, I painted over the orange armor with a custom mix. This is about 3 parts orange shade and 1 part Magmadroth Flame contrast paint. Magmadroth Flame is close to the color I want, but it's way too strong. By diluting it with the orange shade, this new mix is more transparent and flows into the recesses better. I'd like to add some more shading to the orange. With a very sharp brush, I painted Reikland Fleshshade directly into the recesses. The center stripe on the banner needs to be yellow, so I base coated it with a couple layers of thinned moon yellow. I recently bought this color and I really like it. It's nice having a bright yellow that's also very opaque. Once the yellow base coat was dry, I shaded it with Casandora yellow. Next, I painted most of the remaining details with black. Work slowly and use a sharp brush, especially where it meets up against the bright armor. You'll want to paint a second layer for an even finish. I also painted a very narrow black line between the shapes on the banner. It's not completely necessary, but I like the extra definition. I painted the circle on the banner with Bonewhite, leaving a thin, black outline. I'm not worried about getting paint on the symbol, since I'll use opaque paint for that later. Next, I highlighted the outside edge of the circle with Offwhite. You could skip this step if you don't plan on highlighting the rest of the model. I'm painting this now because I think it will be easier to paint before painting the other details. With the circle part finished, next I painted a narrow black outline around the dragon and fire symbols. I'm not worried if some black paint gets on the symbols, since I'll be painting over them, but I want to make sure the line that touches the Bonewhite section is as clean as possible. Next I painted the dragon shape and the strips of fabric with Mephiston red. Try to leave a thin black outline around the dragon shape, and if you don't get it right on the first try, that's okay. I usually have to make a couple corrections on details this small. Just go back and forth between the red, black, and Bonewhite until the shape looks good. Then I shaded the red with Targor Rage Shade. I painted it all over the dragon symbol, and I painted it directly into the recesses on the fabric. Next I painted the fire symbol with moon yellow, leaving a narrow black outline. And then I shaded it with Casandora yellow. I painted the pouch and the belt with Dryad bark, making sure to leave a narrow black outline where it meets up against the armor. Then I shaded the recesses with thinned black paint. The leather is already very dark, and if I paint a shade all over it, it will make it too dark. So in this case, I think it's more effective to paint black directly into the recesses. I painted the remaining details with Runelord brass. Be careful around the details on the helmet and the belt, and remember to leave a narrow black outline. Then I shaded the brass areas with Seraphim Sepia. I like the yellow tone this shade gives to the brass. If you prefer a more reddish brown tone, I would recommend using Reikland Fleshshade instead. At this stage you could assemble the model and call it finished, but I'd like to add some more details, so let's keep going. First let's paint the eyes, and I'd like to do a glowing kind of effect. I began with Evil Sunz Scarlet, thinned with water. With barely any paint on the brush, build up a couple glaze layers close to the eye lens. Notice how quickly the paint dries, and how it doesn't flow anywhere. I'm not worried about painting the lens itself right now, just the part of the mask below it. Once I was happy with the red glazes, I painted the eye with moon yellow, leaving a thin, dark outline. I went back to the Evil Sunz Scarlet and painted a glaze over the eye lens. Paint a second layer if you need to build up the color some more. Then I highlighted the mask just below the eye with Fire Dragon. Finally, I added a tiny dot of moon yellow in the center of the eye. If you need to touch up any red on the face mask, it's easy to fix with a glaze of thinned black paint. Next, I highlighted the helmet with moon yellow on most of the edges. I highlighted the helmet one more time with a very narrow line of toxic yellow. Let's highlight the orange next, and for that I'm using Fire Dragon orange in 2 stages, beginning with a soft glaze highlight. I diluted the paint with some water, and with barely any paint on the brush, apply some glazes near the edges. The less paint you have on the brush, the more control you have over it. The paint should stay exactly where you put it, and if it runs off the brush or flows on the model, it means your brush is overloaded with paint. The brush will deposit a little more paint when you lift it off the model, so I like to end my brush strokes near the edges. That way it naturally builds up the highlights more in the areas I want it to. Once I was happy with the soft highlights, I grabbed some less diluted orange and painted a sharp highlight on the edges. I'd like to highlight the orange one more time, and I used a mix of equal parts Fire Dragon and Toxic Yellow. I made this line more narrow than the previous highlight, and painted it on the sharpest edges and corners. Now is a great time for me to ask you to do those YouTube things that we all love so much. If you're liking the video so far, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. If you really like what I'm doing here and want to support the channel further, please consider Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. We have some perks including a Discord server, printer-friendly PDF files of our new recipe cards, and early access to videos. I highlighted the edges of the red fabric next with Wild Rider red. Then I picked out the corners and a few sharp edges with Fire Dragon. Next I highlighted the black areas with gray number 2 from my custom grayscale, and you can learn how to mix your own set in this video here. If you don't feel like mixing anything, Eshin Gray is pretty close. I like to paint these lines as narrow as possible, because I think it makes the black look darker. On really small details like these, I find it easier to paint the whole shape gray first. Then I'll go back with black and paint a fine line in the middle. I highlighted the black one more time with gray number 5 from my custom grayscale. And if you don't feel like mixing anything, Administratum Gray is close. This is a pretty big jump in value from the last gray. I think that when a highlight color is this much lighter, it's very important to make the line as sharp and as clean as possible, because mistakes will show up easier. Next I highlighted the edges of the leather with Gorthor brown. followed by a sharper edge highlight of Baneblade brown. I mixed a small amount of Retributor armor with Stormhost silver and highlighted the edges of the brass. If you don't feel like mixing anything, Liberator gold is close, but I'd recommend this mix instead. It's more opaque, and you can adjust the ratio to get the exact shade you need. Next I painted the gemstones, beginning with a layer of black paint. Then I painted the gems with Baharroth blue, leaving a thin, black outline. Next I painted the gem all over with Akhelian green, allowing more of the paint to accumulate at the top of the gem. I painted a second layer on the top half of the gem to deepen the color. I highlighted the bottom of the gem with a crescent shape of Baharroth blue. I mixed some white into the blue and highlighted the gem one more time with a smaller crescent shape. Finally, I painted a couple white dots for reflections. Before I assembled the model, I used my craft knife to scrape off the dried paint from the pins. This will help make sure everything fits together well. Then I assembled the model with superglue. At this point I realized I forgot to add some freehand to the bottom of the fabric, so I quickly painted that with thinned Bonewhite, followed by a highlight of Offwhite. I used an old brush to apply a generous layer of wood glue to the base, and then sprinkled on coarse gravel and fine sand. After the glue dried, I painted the base with a layer of thinned Rhinox hide, followed by a heavy dry brush of Mournfang brown, a dry brush of Balor brown, and then a light dry brush of Bonewhite. I painted the rocks with Dawnstone, shaded them with a mix of Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil, and then dry brushed the rocks with a mix of Dawnstone and Bonewhite. I painted the edge of the base with Mournfang brown, and after that dried, I added patches of static grass with superglue. I'd like to give a big shout out to our supporters here on YouTube and now on Patreon as well. Thank you so much for your support. It really is a huge help. If you want to be like these amazing people and help support what I'm doing here, just click the join button down below or follow the Patreon link in the video description. Thank you. I don't get the opportunity to paint bright orange very often, and this model was a nice break from my usual palette of colors. Do you find yourself painting the same colors all the time? Are there any colors you find challenging? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy painting.